the recommended international policy is that no learner should walk a distance which is over 5 kilometers. From the Minister of Finance part, is there isn't much political will in terms of prioritizing BEAM.
Students who are not supposed to be on BEAM are on the BEAM list. What's going on?
This is Open Parley Live.
In September 2024, the Portfolio Committee on Primary and Secondary Education toured the country in a bid to establish the state of education in Zimbabwe. In today's program, we want to focus on the basic education assistance model. There were issues that were raised in the report that was produced by this committee, but today we are just focusing on BEAM. Joining me in this program is Member of Parliament, Ellen Shiri Edenga. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you very much for joining us. For the benefit of our viewers, let's start from the top.
Okay.
What is the basic education assistance model and why was it introduced?
Okay, thanks, Lynette. BEAM is a social assistance program which was introduced in the year 2001 to actually cushion learners who are not able to afford school fees. This was necessitated primarily because of the high dropout rates. We had a lot of learners that were dropping out of school because their parents could not afford school fees, and also with instances where with child-headed families. Remember, during that time, that's when we had the prevalence of HIV and AIDS cases, and also, that's when our economy had dropped drastically. So, because of those instances, the government saw it fit, to actually cushion such learners so that they're able to go back to school and they're able to learn.
And I like the way that you've given us a helicopter view, showing us how education is linked to the home, healthcare, and the economy. And it was around the time, we had just implemented we were experiencing the effects of the structural adjustment programs, and a lot of people were unemployed. You you were part of the committee that toured the country. What was the situation like on the ground?
With respect to BEAM, we had serious concerns. Generally, most of the schools that we visited, they last received their BEAM allocations between the years 2019 and 2022. Unfortunately, even to date, that's still the case because government has still not honored its obligation in terms of BEAM payments. So really, that brought a lot of that brings a lot of burden on the part of school in terms of its developmental needs, and also the challenge that we encountered was the fact that particularly in rural schools, the bulk of the learners are under BEAM. You get to a situation, for example, where out of 240 learners, 200 of them are under BEAM. So really, that is a cause for concern, considering that, government does not pay. So ultimately, that has net effects in terms of, not just schools' infrastructure development, but also even other basic essentials for schools to provide quality education, like even teaching and learning materials. Now we have the heritage-based curriculum. The schools should be using that part of that money to purchase textbooks and all other equipment related to HBC, to the heritage-based curriculum. For example, this new curriculum speaks a lot about research and innovation. So when we speak of research, obviously there's need for ICT equipment, there's need for laptops or computers, there's need for even internet connectivity. So due to the fact that, government has not honored its part on BEAM, then that becomes problematic to effectively implement this new curriculum. And also the sad part about it all is, out of those learners that are eligible to pay their fees, they are not doing that. You realize that maybe there's actually, most of the schools that we went to, you realize that in some cases there's only 10%, payment rate, meaning that only a few are paying. So that presents a lot of burden to the school. But then the sad part about it all is that ultimately, the burden goes back to the parents, because now the parents now government is not paid. The parents now have to scrounge around to cover the gap, which is supposed to be covered for by government. So that is very problematic, because parents are already overburdened. They have other obligations which they cannot cater for because of their economic circumstances.
As you explained it, this assistance module was a very timely social service cushion. But then here you are bemoaning the fact that government is not releasing funds, and it basically makes this useless because the schools are unable to receive these funds. Maybe let's go back and walk us through, because you mentioned the issue of development. Yes, you spoke about ICT, you spoke about the latest curriculum. What development? Does that also include infrastructure, and what kind of infrastructure? And maybe if you can tell us what you saw when you visited these schools. Okay,
thank you. Let me, before I go there, let me speak to the budgetary implications in terms of what was allocated to the Ministry of Education, to give you a picture of the situation that we are faced up with. You look at in terms of allocations, out of the total budget for the ministry, 93.2% of its allocation goes towards employment costs, the salaries for teachers, ancillary staff, and also even recurrent costs. So, and then that leaves about 6.8% of the money, or of the budget, which is meant for other activities or other operational activities within the school. And then we related to your question, we speak of, for example, the school's infrastructure. Is the building of classrooms. Currently, we have, as the Ministry of Education, there's a deficit of around 2,800 schools, and meaning that children have to walk long distances. So if that money if the budget catered for capital expenditures, then the ministry would have been able to build schools and actually cushion, our learners that walk long distances. And the other issue is around learner services, welfare. For example, we speak of the provision of sanitary pads, the psychosocial support. There's a lot going on out there, and our learners need that guidance. So there's need for budget allocations to that regard. And mostly importantly, because of the new curriculum, there's need for teaching and learning materials. There's need for the provision of textbooks. There's need for the provision of pencils, pens, ICT equipment, internet connectivity. So those are some of the, the needs of the ministries of the Ministry of Education and our schools out there. But because there isn't much budgetary support, it becomes problematic. But it would have been hoped that in the event that the government honored its obligation in terms of paying BEAM, then some of those essentials would have been catered for.
I know that you, as a committee and as Parliament, you managed to engage the minister.
Yes.
What is the problem? What scenario did he give you, regarding to these late payments? Because we can't have, for instance, we're in 2025, and there are schools since 2019, during the COVID-19 pandemic, who did not receive funds. And, that's a long time. What is the minister saying?
Okay, As a committee with the opportunity to engage both the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education and Public Service Ministry, basically both ministries lamented to the effect that they haven't received funds. They've made their request to the Minister of Finance, but Finance is not honored, the payments. So yeah, but that's basically the major problem in that regard. But also,
what about political will?
In terms of political will, you look at I feel from the Minister of Finance part is there isn't much political will in terms of prioritizing BEAM.
Like, what is more important than educating the children of a nation?
Exactly, that's where my point is. Let me before I go there, let me just give you a synopsis of the budgetary disbursements, funds disbursements for 2024. The Minister of Public Service, which is the Social Security Ministry, where BEAM is housed, received the least allocation. The least disbursement for 2024. They received 19.68% for the whole year.
That's
precisely that explains why they were not able to pay its BEAM obligations, and the reason why also I tend to believe there isn't much political will. You look at what other ministries were allocated. For example, the ministry responsible for transport, it got 162.8% of its disbursements in 2024. And same applies to the Minister of responsible for lands and agriculture. It had over 105% disbursement. What it meant is these two ministries, for example, exceeded their budget allocations for 2024 and ate away the share of other ministries. And the Minister of Public Service in this case was also, seems it was at the receiving end. Precisely that's the reason why they haven't been able to meet up with their budgetary obligations.
MP, I noticed that in 2024 we had a lot of road construction in preparation for SADC. And to me, this showing that government was more concerned about showing SADC leaders how nice our roads are at the expense of the children, the vulnerable children who cannot go to school.
Exactly, that's the issues. This is why I speak to issues around budget prioritization. The state was more focused on creating an image to say, no, we have good roads in Zimbabwe at the expense of our education. The same applies with agriculture. The money went to farming implements, Pfumvudza and stuff like that, which ultimately was done for political aggrandizement, not for at the expense of our children who are not in school. So really, I think there is need for government to sit down and actually try to set its priorities straight. Because you look at as a committee, when we're moving around the country, we're kind of assessing the state of universal access to education as a country. And from what we saw on the ground, we still have a long way to go. And that, I certainly believe, it starts off with the political will, setting up the right budgetary infrastructure and resources to us to support our education.
And you spoke about the issue of the deficit. We've got about 2,000 schools, that are required right now in this country. And some students, according to your report, are moving more than 5 kilometers. What does the policy say about the distance, the acceptable distance for a student to walk? I'm saying this because you walk long distance, your BEAM fees has not registered at the school, one ends up, not going to school at all.
Exactly. It's not just the national policy, but the recommended international policy is that no learner should walk a distance which is over 5 kilometers. Yes, but then you realize that we go back to our rural schools mainly. Children, some they walk even 17 kilometers one way to school. And you know the implications that it has. For example, by the time the learner gets to school, he or she will be tired. And that affects his or her concentration levels. And then we expect that learner to pass at the end of the day. And also, you know, walking such long distances, we talk about our ECD children. You know, we're talking about 4 or 5 year olds.
And especially in this cold.
Yeah, and you know, no parent would want his or her child to walk such long distances. So ultimately, that child will be kept at home. This is what is currently happening. So, and also the effect long distances have on the girl child. You know, we have areas where there are artisanal miners, for example. We have had cases
within
where,
that 17 kilometer distance.
Cases where even these schoolgirls have been abused, sexually abused.
On their way to school?
On their way to school. Some are even trolled on their way. So that puts the girl child in a vulnerable position. And even, of course, our boy children as well. They are affected. So really, I think it goes back to the issue of prioritization in terms of budgets. To say there is an urgent need to actually build more schools.
One of the issues that was highlighted in the report was the issue of people who students who are not supposed to be on BIM are on the BIM list. What's going on?
What we noted on the ground when we visited schools, there was concern that we have political elites, you know, that kind of influence the BIM selection process, where they forcefully include their children, yet they do not qualify to be under BIM. So, yeah. And it goes back to, it's not just the same issue, the only issue. Even cases where the rightful the appropriate beneficiaries were not covered under BIM. So now what we recommended as a committee is to say there is need to review the entire BIM selection framework and to actually specifically categorize the appropriate beneficiaries, and also even the selection criteria should be modified to ensure that all deserving learners are included. So yeah, because we realize that we have, for example, like councillors, you know, councillors are politicians, they are part of the BIM selection process. So now they will use their political muscles, you know, to ensure that, you know, some of their children or some of their political acquaintances are included under BIM.
And in terms of transparency, how is, you know, yes, you spoke about, you know, reforming the selection criteria, but in the past, how transparent was this process?
Well, of course, we've always had such issues, but I think at least what's needed now, which I think even in the past there was a monitoring framework to say, a follow-up in terms of the beneficiaries, even if needs be to even go to their homes and verify for sure that this child is an orphan or this child lives with a grandmother who is unemployed. You know, so there is need for even a monitoring framework which will actually track or even profile. There is even what the schools, I think I've seen is part of the heritage-based curriculum, the profiling of learners. That should be done at each and every school. I so believe that once a school has a profile to say we have 200 learners in this particular school, they're able to profile to say this learner lives, this is the address, is a child-headed, he lives in a child-headed household, the father is unemployed, such that even when it comes to the selection process, it's easier to go back to the database to say, okay, fine, this is the list of our learners, the more deserving, those that are qualified, they are able to actually select them from the database, unlike a situation whereby they will have to go out there, engage people, someone say, no, can you include this learner? So I think there is need for profiling, and I think this is one issue that the ministry should heavily invest in.
And in terms of funding, as we conclude?
In terms of funding for BEAM, yeah, it goes back to the issue of our political will and in prioritization of resources.
What are you urging the minister to do?
What I'm urging I think, in fact, there are two issues. Firstly, the Minister of Education and even the stakeholders out there, you have said, firstly, the BEAM facility should be housed under the Minister of Education because the ministry knows its needs and its priorities. So that is the starting point. And secondly, we have 1.5 million learners that are supposed to be under BEAM. And I urge the Minister of Finance to seriously consider that and seriously allocate, the funds that are supposed to be given to BEAM. Because already there are shortfalls. And by the way, Lynette, now in instances where allocations have been met, that money would have been eroded by inflation. Say, for example, in 2022, the school requested, say, an equivalent to 30,000 ZiG, for example, or maybe like 500,000 ZiG. This is the amount that will be given by the same amount that they will have requested for. It's the same that will be allocated to them. And you realize in some cases we're told that it's equivalent to maybe what they allocated, it will be equivalent, say, to $2 a dollar, which is in real terms.
Inflation, exchange rate, coupled
in real terms, it will not help.
Amount to nothing. Yeah. On that note, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Lynette.
There you have it, viewers. That was legislator Ellen Shiriedenga. She's part of the Primary and Education Committee, and she was just talking to us about the Basic Education Assistant module, that is BEAM, that was introduced 24 years ago to assist vulnerable children. But government is showing lack of willingness to fund this system. Let us know what you think in the comment section. Until next time, my name is Lynette Manzini. Goodbye.
This is Open Parley Live.